In this video, I'll show you how to recreate this cool macOS UI animation inspired by Iman lead editor, Nikola. This animation hasn't been covered anywhere on YouTube yet, so be sure to watch until the end. Plus, I've included all the assets I used in the description below, making it easy for you to follow along. And now let's get to work. Alright, so the first thing we're gonna do is to drop our assets inside the project panel. I'm gonna create a new folder right here so it's organized well. I'm gonna name it assets. I'm gonna select all of the assets and drop them into the assets folder. And now we're gonna take our background and place it inside the timeline. Right click on the screen, transform, and then fit the comp. And the first thing I want to focus on is to create this little dock at the bottom. So I'm gonna click on this rectangle tool and draw a shape like this. I'll make sure the fill is on and the stroke set to about 1 pixel. I'm gonna make it a bit more darker color, and I'm gonna set the roundness to about 25. Now I'm gonna start positioning our icons inside the dock. So let's scale it down a bit, place it inside here. Something like this is fine. I'm just gonna quickly make sure our shape layer is a bit shorter. Now I'm gonna add the other icons inside, scale it down, and place it right next to the other one. You can also press Ctrl R and drag these rulers down, so it's a bit easier to work with and have everything aligned. And now we can scale this one up a bit. And now I'm gonna proceed with the same process by adding other icons inside. Now that I'm done, I'm just quickly going to remove these rulers just by dragging them up or down and hit Ctrl R to remove this. You can obviously have as many icons as you want, but this is enough for me and I'm going to leave it at this. I'm just quickly going to select all of the icons by holding Shift and now drag them approximately to the middle. And then I'll get into the shape properties, open rectangle, rectangle path, unlink the size here, and I'll scale it down. The reason I did not go to scale option, unlink it over here and then scale it here is because, as you can see, if I do right here, the edges get really distorted, and that's not the look we want to go for. I would also like to change this color a little. I'm gonna actually make it a lot darker, something like this, and also make the stroke a lot darker. And the last thing I'm gonna do about this is to click on the shape layer, press T for transparency, and set the opacity to about 85%. And now we're done with this docking station at the bottom. We can now select all of these icons with the shape layer and press Ctrl-Shift-C to pre-compose them. And we can simply name it dock. Now I'm gonna focus on creating the main Finder window. So let's click on the rectangle tool again, draw a shape approximately like this, perhaps make it a bit bigger. We can always scale it up or down later, so it doesn't really matter. Let's first set the roundness to about 25 again, and then let's go to the assets folder and drag this one inside. Let's place it around here. Now we can click on the shape layer and choose this eyedropper tool and select this color. That way the shape layer is gonna be the same color as this background right here. Now that the screenshot is finally in place, we're gonna make sure the other part of this shape layer is in a slightly different color. So we're gonna duplicate the shape layer with Ctrl D, and now we're gonna track matte it to the first one, and now go up here to fill and change it to a slightly lighter color. Something like this will do, and now click OK. Now we're gonna make sure we turn the first layer back on and slide the second one a bit to the right. We're gonna set its roundness back to 0 and make sure it has no stroke. And now make sure the second shape is over the screenshot so it's not glitching right here. And that's it. We have now successfully made our Finder window. Let's now go to the assets and drag our folder and the Mac cursor inside our composition. Let's scale the folder down, place it approximately somewhere here. And let's also scale the Mac cursor down and place it around here. Now let's click on the type tool and type raw footage right here. Select it with Ctrl A and change its color to white. Scale it up a little. I'm gonna click here to switch the anchor point to the middle. If you don't have this plugin, by the way, this plugin is called Motion Tools. If you're not using the Motion Tools plugin, you can always select the text, keep holding Ctrl or Command, and double click on this pan behind tool. That's gonna select your anchor point to the middle. Now simply position the text under the folder, something like this. Now we're gonna parent this text with the folder so that when we move the folder, the text moves along with it. And now is the right time to start animating it a little. So we're gonna select these two shape layers with this screenshot, Ctrl-Shift-C to pre-compose them, and let's call it Finder window. Click OK, and now we have it a bit more organized. Now we're gonna parent the folder with the Finder window so that when we scale the Finder window up or down, the folder itself scales with it. So let's go a bit further with the playhead, set a keyframe for scale, press P for position and set a keyframe for position as well. Now press U on the keyboard to see all of the keyframes we have previously activated, and now go back to the beginning, make sure to scale it down and place it around here. So this is how it's gonna look like in the beginning, and then it's progressively gonna scale up. So this looks really bad now, so we're gonna select the keyframes, press F9 to easy ease them. If you don't have that shortcut, you can always go right click, keyframe assistant, and click on easy ease here. While having them selected, go to the graph editor, and we're gonna create this left peak graph. Now I'm gonna drag these two a bit further apart because the animation is too short, and this is how it looks like now. Now let's animate this Mac cursor. So select it, press P for position, set a keyframe, go a bit further with the playhead, and now let's move this cursor to the position of this folder right here. Again, select the keyframes and easy ease them, and I think some kind of a mid graph like this is gonna be good. The only thing that I'd change about this movement is that it's not so linear. Right now we can see that the cursor moves in a very linear path, and we can change that by holding onto this pen tool, clicking on the convert vertex tool, and I'll simply drag this point a bit up. That way we can adjust the keyframed path of our cursor. I think something like this looks fine. And now when I play the video, we're gonna see how the cursor moves in a much more natural way. In the meantime, I've added a little adjustment to the graph, as well as pushing this keyframe a bit further from the beginning. Now let's snap to the end keyframe of this Mac cursor, and let's make this cursor drag this folder to the middle right here. So we're gonna do it by selecting the folder, pressing P for position, setting a keyframe, and then going a bit further and moving the folder down, approximately here. But we can see that the cursor didn't follow. So we can go to the first keyframe, click Ctrl-Shift-D on our keyboard, press U on this new layer and delete the keyframes, and I'll parent this second Mac cursor layer with the folder. Now as the folder is moving, the Mac cursor is following its movement and is moving with it as well. So let's select the keyframes, easy ease them again, tweak them up a bit in the graph editor, and now it's time to make the whole screen zoom in and to create that cool popping timeline animation. To do that, let's first click on the rectangle tool, draw some kind of a shape, make sure the fill is on. We're gonna set it to some kind of a green color, make it a bit smaller, something like this. Make it small enough so it can fit behind this folder. So let's place it behind the folder in the timeline. And now we're gonna make it pop out of the folder like this, and then spread it out into some kind of a timeline. So let's first place it behind the folder, press P for position on the shape layer, set a keyframe, also hit R for rotation, set a keyframe as well, and then press U. And now go a bit forward and then move the shape layer up. Now we're gonna drag the first rotation keyframe to the end, go to the beginning and set the rotation to 1, which is equivalent to 360 degrees. Now easy ease the keyframes and play with the graph. I made a full left peak like this. This is how it looks now. But before we proceed with anything else, first I want to create that zoom in movement. We're gonna do it by creating a new null object and parenting every object that is not parented to anything to the null. Now when we scale this null, it's gonna look like everything is zooming into the frame. That way we can only work with 2D layers instead of having to create a camera and work with 3D layers. So let's set a keyframe for the scale of the null at the beginning, and then go a bit further up and scale it up by a lot. So we're gonna select the keyframes, easy ease them. And now to sell the effect even better, we're gonna look at the folder keyframes, and we're gonna identify the timeline position at which this graph is at its top velocity. So remember this, and then without moving the playhead, we're gonna select these keyframes, go to the graph, and now make the peak or the fastest point right at the middle of this playhead. That is gonna create a very good match between the movement of the null object with the movement of the folder, and therefore create a very sharp and dramatic zoom in. Let's now make the whole background a lot darker when the zoom in is happening. So we're gonna create a new solid. We're gonna make it fully black. Make sure to place it above the Finder window, and now simply press T for opacity, set a keyframe. Let's set it to about 50%, move it a bit further, and now change the opacity to 0. Select the keyframes, easy ease again. Now drag them a bit further apart, even more I think, so it's a subtle change, and that way our background gets a lot darker as the zoom in is happening. And now we can get back to animating the timeline. So let's open up the shape layer, go to contents, rectangle, then rectangle path, unlink the proportions of the size option, then keyframe it, press U to see all the keyframes, take that keyframe and put it back a little, and now we can stretch it out a bit like this. I would even add a bit of roundness to the shape. 5 is good enough. Now again, easy ease the keyframes, tweak up the graph a bit, and then we created something like this. Now let's duplicate our shape layer, press U and delete all of the keyframes. Now we can go further, and I'll simply create all of the other timeline elements. Let's quickly change its color. We're gonna choose pink, and now we can randomly spread these out across the screen. For example, make it a bit larger like this. Now we can duplicate this one with Control D and drag it over here. We can perhaps make this one a bit smaller, but always remember, never scale them like this because the edges get distorted. Open up the shape layer, contents, rectangle, rectangle path, then unlink this option and then scale it like this. Now position it appropriately, and now you can duplicate that one, drag it over here. You can now scale that one up, drag it here, and now repeat the process over and over again. Also, in the meantime, I decided to adjust the roundness from 5 to 3. I thought it looked a little better. And then once you're done with the top timeline layer, now you can start creating the rest. So you can duplicate the layer again, drag it down by holding shift. You can change the color to, for example, some kind of darker greenish, and now repeat the same process over and over again. And now that we're finally done with creating the timeline, select all of the shape layers by holding shift. First, make sure that these layers are not parented to anything. Now press Ctrl-Shift-C and call this timeline. Now you can parent this pre-composition to the null, and now everything is gonna look the same, but all of these shape layers are gonna be in a different pre-composition. That way the timeline is much more organized and it is a lot easier to work with. So let's enter the timeline pre-composition. Before we start doing anything inside, let's quickly organize these layers inside as well so it's easier to work with. So the first top 3 layers are some kind of bluish color. So we're gonna go to change color here and choose this blue right here. That matches the color of the actual layer, so it's a lot easier to navigate. Now we're gonna select the next 4 layers and we're gonna choose some kind of a darker green color. Next we have the shape layer 1. We're simply gonna choose the regular green for that one, and the rest are gonna be in pink. Before we start animating each timeline element, first I wanna add a mask around them, and I'm gonna show you why. So click on the rectangle tool, draw a shape approximately like this, search for the effect called Fastbox Blur, add it to the shape, and now increase the blur radius. Now click on this toggle switches / modes here, select every shape layer other than the mask layer, and track matte it to the mask. So now when we're gonna be animating them, they're gonna be flying in like this, but it's all gonna look very subtle instead of them just appearing out of thin air. So once again, select all of the shape layers, press P for position, and set a position keyframe for each one. Of course, except for this one right here. Now simply go back with the playhead, and now one by one start changing their position. This one is gonna fly in from the left, this one also, and these two are gonna fly in from the right side. These two are coming in from the left, these two from the right, and so on. And now when we're done, we can select all of the keyframes and press F9 to easy ease them. Select them, get into the graph editor, and make some kind of a left peak like this, or however you want them to appear. And this looks fine now, but they're all appearing at the same time, so we're just gonna have to offset them a bit. For example, like this. We can keep offsetting them, testing out what we like the most, and when we play the video we're gonna see how it looks like. So we just have to repeat the same process for the other colors, and this is how it looks like in the end. I think it looks really good. So what I would do now is to select all of them again and turn motion blur for each one. Motion blur is really important to sell the effect completely. It really is a game changer when you're creating motion design. Next, we're gonna create a timeline indicator. So let's click on the pen tool, zoom in a bit, and now we're gonna draw this shape. So if you want to make a straight line, you make sure you hold shift, click on the screen, and now simply keep drawing, connecting the little lines. And now I can correct them afterwards. I think this is good enough, but we're gonna make it a bit smaller, something like this, and then we can scale it down. And now we can draw this little line right here. Click, make sure to hold shift and click down here. If you want to change your bottom like this, you can go to the contents, shape, path, stroke, and then you can open the taper options and set the end length to about 25%. That way it's not gonna end so harshly, but it's going to have this subtle fade at the end. And now to animate this playhead, we're gonna parent this line to this head, so parent them together. And now we can press P for position, set a keyframe, go further, and then just move the playhead forward. And now we can animate each element. For example, let's animate the line first. Open the shape layer up, click on add here and choose trim paths. Open up trim paths, set a keyframe to the end, move it a bit forward, and set the end to 0. You can easy ease them, and we can also animate this head by just fading it in. So set a keyframe for the opacity, move it forward, and set it back to 0, and easy ease the keyframes again. So this is how the animation turned out in the end. And now that we're done, we can go back to our main composition. position. Here we can see that it's taking too much time for the animation to start. So what we're gonna do is actually go to the beginning of this timeline, parent it with the folder, and now drag it a bit to the left. That way, when we play the animation now, this green little timeline element is now parented to the folder, so it's moving along with it. So now the animation starts a lot faster and it looks much better and much more subtle. And at the end, to really sell the effect, we can add deep glow to everything. Let's turn it down a bit, set it to perhaps 0.1, and this really helps to sell the effect. But if you don't have deep glow, that's fine. You can use regular glow instead and make it look good too. Next, we're gonna unzoom the whole screen and make that other little shape layer appear. So to create the next movement, we're gonna be adding a new null object to the scene. So click on the null object and make sure the previous null is parented to the new one. That way we can overlap the keyframes and make the motion a lot more seamless and a lot smoother. I've made a video about this topic already, but if you haven't seen it, I'm gonna leave it on the screen somewhere right now, so you can go check it out because it's in much more detail. So we're gonna press S for scale on the second null, set a keyframe, go a bit forward, and we're gonna slightly unzoom it. The reason we're doing this is to keep the screen moving the whole time. So let's select the keyframes and easy ease them. We can do a right peak like this, perhaps spread this one out even more. And once we've done this, we're gonna create another null object and again parent the previous one to the new one. Now we're gonna create a much sharper movement where that little shape layer box is gonna appear. So keyframe scale again, go forward and unzoom even more. Easy ease again, but this one is gonna be a lot more serious. We're gonna make a left peak on this one. So it slowly zooms in, animation is ongoing, slowly goes out, and then zooms out very fast at the end. And of course, as it's zooming out, we're gonna make this little timeline scale down into this folder. So press S for scale on the timeline, set a keyframe, press P for position and set a keyframe as well. Press U to see all the keyframes, go a bit forward. Now scale it down and position it behind the folder. Scale it down even more, and of course easy ease the keyframes. I created a left peak, and of course as this zooms out we want to make the background lighter again, but first I just want to make it darker a bit. So I'm gonna set it from 50 to 75% or 70 and then go forward, and when it starts zooming out I'm gonna copy the ending keyframe and paste it here, and right about here I'm gonna copy the first keyframe and set it over here. It happens a bit too slow, so I'm gonna move it here, reduce the space between those keyframes. Something like this looks good to me. Okay, so now we can design this little shape element that I was talking to you about. So click on the rectangle tool, draw a shape. I'm gonna set the roundness to about 50. I'm gonna set the fill color to some dark gray, even close to black, and the outline is gonna be a bit lighter, perhaps something like this. I'll change the opacity to about 85%. I'll make the fill color even a bit darker, and I'll go to the project panel and drag this upload icon here. Scale it down, position it approximately in the middle of that layer. I'm gonna add a tint effect to it and swap the colors. Then I'm gonna map this white color to something a bit more grayish like this, and under that I'm gonna use this text tool and write a text like this. I'm gonna make it slightly bigger and change the color to gray. And of course I'll drag this screenshot right here, and now I'm gonna mask these little dots right here because we need them, and position them at the top over here. We can see the slight color difference, but we can fix that by either changing the shape layer color or using an effect called extract. Then simply drag these points to the right until the background is gone. I'm just gonna make them slightly smaller, and I decided to make the shape smaller as well. This is now fine. And once we're done designing this little shape element, we're gonna pre-compose it. So select everything, Ctrl-Shift-C, and I'm gonna call that one file upload. Why the file upload? Well, because we're gonna be animating this folder right here for the upload. But the first thing we have to do is to animate this object coming from the bottom to here. First, let's parent it to the first null object. Then we're gonna press P for position on the file upload pre-composition, set a keyframe, pop it back. Now position it a bit down here. Now go back with the playhead and move the first keyframe a bit backwards. Select them and easy ease them. I think I'm gonna make some kind of a mid graph. Actually, I'm gonna make it a left peak. And at the end, we can also choose this convert vertex tool and make this line a lot more curved. That way the animation is going to look a lot better. Now let's simply animate the dragging of this folder to this drop down menu. So click on the folder layer, press U to see all the keyframes, copy this last position keyframe with Ctrl-C, paste it here with Ctrl-V, go a bit forward, and now drag it over here. Of course, drag the file upload under the folder, spread these keyframes a little, make a mid peak here. And now we can go to the file upload precomposition and add Gaussian blur to our upload icon, set it to around 20, turn off repeat edge pixels, and then copy the Gaussian blur and paste it to our text. But make sure it's set to a lower value such as 5. Set the blurriness keyframes for both upload icon and the text. Press U to see the keyframes, push them a bit further, and now set them back to 0. Easy ease them. And now as the folder gets over this shape, the background is gonna get blurry and add more realism to it. And also at the end, what you can do to make it better is to add a CC lens effect. So make sure to set the size to 500 and convergence to 0. Keyframe these two values, go back, and perhaps play with the settings to make it curved a bit like this. You can always duplicate the effect and play around with the settings to make it look as best as possible. What you can do is always copy these CC lens effects over to other elements. For example, you can copy it over to this timeline right here, play with the settings to make it look good. And you could also do it at the beginning here like it is in Nikola's video, but I'm not gonna show you that now since I've shown you that on this example. And at the end, I'd just like to show you some more effects that's completely gonna sell this animation. So we're gonna add a new adjustment layer, make sure it's placed above everything else. First, we're gonna add the effect called lumetric color. This way we can pump up the saturation a bit, make sure we crank up the contrast too. You could also play around with the rest of the settings, like bump up the highlights, for example, maybe turn the whites up a bit, turn down the blacks. After that, I'm gonna add the effect called posterize time, set it to around the value of 18. That's gonna make sure the FPS is lower than usual. And also one of my favorites, noise. Make sure to turn off the color noise, set it to around 7. And at the end, we could even add the Gaussian blur to our dock, pump it up to around 12. And at the very end, you can finally add the effect called CC Vignette. I'm gonna place it above the noise effect. You can tweak up the settings a bit here. As you can see, if I turn the effect on, you can notice that the sides get a bit darker while the middle stays basically the same. And that basically allows us to shift the viewer's focus into the middle of the screen. And with some final touches, your scene should look something like this. As promised, all the assets that I use are linked down in the description. Let me know in the comments what you'd like me to cover next. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.